Erdoğanism without Erdoğan. Even if Turkey's president loses the upcoming elections, his legacy could long outlast him. That's what's not being said in the discussion over Turkey right now. Obviously, opponents of Recep Tayyip Erdoğan are hoping that this year's elections will finally see the back of him after a tumultuous 20 years in power, but they could be in for a shock. So, of course, the elections are set for 14th of May so far, two elections, one for the presidency and another for parliament. And the campaigning has become even more intense as a result of the horrendous earthquake that struck in southeast Turkey and North Syria on 6th of February, killing at least 43,000 people at last count, and the numbers, of course, are still rising. But sensing that the electoral tide is turning against him, Erdoğan has reacted angrily to public criticism of the shoddy construction standards of recent years and claims of a slow disaster response, both of which the opposition are trying to capitalize on. The government has declared a 3-month state of emergency in 10 impacted provinces, and speculation is rising. They could try to delay the election if the public mood looks like it might give victory to the opposition. So opinion polls before the quake showed that the alliance between Erdoğan's Justice and Development Party, the AKP, and the Nationalist Movement Party is still holding strong, which would mean that even if the six-party opposition coalition manages to take the presidency, it would still fail to win control of parliament itself. That would make it difficult for the opposition to bring back the previous parliamentary system that Erdoğan removed through constitutional changes approved by plebiscite. The big question is the presidential election. Erdoğan is still the single most popular candidate in a diverse field. His problem is that if voters unite around a single personality in a runoff, he trails behind most of the potential opposition candidates who are in alliance to defeat him. Following the recent judicial ban from further office of popular Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu for insulting election officials, which was a completely trumped-up charge, the road has been cleared for the Republican People's Party leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu to become that single candidate. The opposition also includes numerous figures who think they should be the anointed one to challenge Erdoğan, including the Good Party leader Meral Akşener and Ankara Mayor Mansur Yavaş, who is also from the Republican People's Party. But as the oldest among them, Kılıçdaroğlu has made it clear in recent months that he sees this as his right, especially since he agreed to allow the younger Muharrem İnce to run as the Republican People's Party candidate in 2018. So born in 1948, Kılıçdaroğlu projects himself as Turkey's elder statesman, the adult in the room, if you like. But the opposition knows that as soon as their unity candidate is announced, which may be in early March, when the formal day for election is set in stone, that's how it's meant to be so far. But as soon as they announce who their unity candidate is, the government media machine will go after him ferociously, or her, says Meral Akşener. This Kılıçdaroğlu, they will go after him ferociously. They will target him specifically as old, as weak, and as out of touch. And the opposite of everything the government will say Turkey has become under Erdoğan. And whether young people come out to vote for someone like Kılıçdaroğlu, that's a serious question. They will brand him as this kind of soft on terror risk to national security, secretly wooing the pro-Kurdish Democrat People's Party, which recently said itself it will run its own presidential candidate. It's not joining officially the six-party alliance against Erdoğan and AKP. Finally, the government is likely to play the sectarian card against Kılıçdaroğlu. He is an Alevi of Kurdish origin, and the AKP has made heavy use of Sunni identity as a political weapon in the past, especially during the Syrian civil war, when Erdoğan and pro-AKP media depicted the conflict as a kind of jihad against an Alawite regime who are, in their view, deviants in faith. That was the presentation. So the other big question hanging over the election is, as everyone phrases it, will the government try to rig the vote in any way? The trend here of recent elections has been to really push the envelope as far as possible without going over the line into us being able to say it's not a still functioning democracy. The voting process itself is heavily monitored in major urban centres, But out in the provinces, especially the southeast, it becomes difficult to follow what's happening inside polling stations during and after voting hours. The government also has complete control of the process through its electoral commission, which has made a habit of providing immediate announcements to the state news agency that become etched in stone. There's also the wild card of the high numbers of undecided voters, as well as the large number of Turks who live abroad, Turkish registered voters who live abroad. And their votes could be made to tip the government over the line if things are looking dubious. So there are things baked in there that there are some elements that the government can play with. Despite all that, the AKP has lost two significant elections recently. In 2019, the mayorships of Istanbul and Ankara. In the case of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu won even after the government convinced a court to overturn the first vote and hold it again. Turkey still fundamentally, as I say, they operate within the broad margins of what happens in functioning democracies without slipping quite into the kind of kabuki theater you get in countries like Egypt. But beyond that, the question I want to ask is, how significant would Erdogan's fall really be? On foreign policy, people have talked about a sea change that would see Turkey throw itself back into the arms of NATO and Washington after a tense 2 decades. That's the idea that's out there. But to be honest, it seems pretty far-fetched. At every opportunity, Erdogan and the government have taken that chance to play the popular card against those institutions and entities. Just look at the recent response they took over the Quran burning in Sweden. Just one of so many examples. A whole generation of Turkish citizens have grown up used to a country that presents itself as a regional, if not global, power, and one that, like Nasserist Egypt of the 1950s and 60s, operates within diverse spheres of influence. In Turkey's case, the Muslim Middle Eastern, the Eurasian, and the Western. No government can just toss this thinking out overnight. For one thing, the Eurasianism was already a strong current in the military, and it's only gained ground under Erdogan. Secondly, fixing Turkey's dire economic problems via Western financial institutions would come at a price that compromises this newly won foreign policy independence. Even if the next government yanks up interest rates to rein in the spending power of ordinary people, which many people imagine will happen and probably would, the government would still balk, very much likely balk, at the idea of a full return to hot money in Turkish financial markets and the thought of IMF help to deal with debt. Membership of a global south that wants to de-dollarize, something Erdogan has really been pushing in recent years, could still count for something in official thinking. Although, certainly in the short term, I would agree that the temptation to follow the neoliberal script will be real. Thirdly, few Turks want to go back to the system of military guardianship and occasional overt junta rule that Erdogan scored a historic success in overturning during his time in office. That military rule, which lasted since the 1960s, is this kind of these kind of guardians behind the scene that would manipulate the political system and step in blatantly when it suited them. Their rules were fundamentally fascistic, and they maintained a very conservative. They maintained this kind of oppression of conservative religious values in public space. And fundamentally, I really don't think most people want to go back to that. Specifically amongst the AKP base, Erdogan supporters, they really don't want that to happen again. So there's a strong incentive for people beyond the AKP base for any future government to make sure that that's not what happens again, because I really don't think people want that. So the stakes are incredibly high, but for one other reason, they're higher than before, which is that this year marks a centenary of the Turkish Republic. So there's enormous prestige that will accrue to the government that rules at this important juncture in history. Victory would give Erdogan and the AKP a green light to push ahead with their project to shape Erdogan as the de facto founder of a second republic. The most important figure, not so much since Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, but since Sultan Abdulhamid II, late 19th century, early 20th century. It would also consolidate the AKP as a permanent party of power. It would save Erdoğan from possible corruption trials, and it would prevent a likely purge of the Islamist movement as well. However, the ultimate irony of Erdoğan's remarkable longevity has been the chutzpah of stealing from Kemalism itself, despite hailing from an ideological movement based on debunking much of Ataturk's legacy. Erdoğan first opted for his alliance with the nationalists of the ultra-nationalist party that he's allied with in 2015, when waning popularity meant that the AKP's electoral dominance on its own was under threat. But the fact is, this marriage between these two ideological groups has really proven resilient, and it's been tough to beat so far. So, despite frequent predictions of its demise, I think that breaking this Islamist nationalist nuclear bond remains the opposition's biggest challenge, really.